This presentation covers the second half of the chapter that we went over the last lesson. I want to urge you to make sure that you're not only watching these presentations, but that you're reading over the textbook as well. First of all, hearing something twice. Hearing something that you've read once already or once or twice already is just going to reinforce what you've already read. Or watching the lesson first and then going back and reading is going to help you understand. But I'm only glossing over the chapter. I'm not going over the entire chapter. And the same way that in a class I would probably just pick up, an in-person class I would just pick up on some key highlights. People who do well in this class are the people who really read the textbook and pick up on the tips and the instructions for writing argumentative writing. It's a really, really good textbook. Your textbook gives you some additional questions to ask yourself that will help you to understand and engage your audience. So you want to imagine your audience while you're writing. Always keep your audience in mind. Here are the questions from page 235. Who are my readers? What do they believe? And what common ground do we share? I want to stop and say something about these three questions. We live in Florida. Florida is a state that has a diverse group of people, different ethnic backgrounds, different religions, different political backgrounds. We're a swing state. So even if you grew up with people who had the same religious beliefs, the same political beliefs, when you come to college, even if you went to a private school, you probably spend a lot of time with people who have the same beliefs, even in high school. What you have to remember when you come to college is that your readers are going to be a diverse group of people with different political backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different cultural and ethnic backgrounds that you may not share much common ground with, but you still need to respect them and you still need to keep that in mind as you write. You also want to keep in mind what do they know? What do they need to know? You want to think about the things that people already know about what you're writing about and what you think that they need to know about what you're writing about. And then finally, why should they care? You can't keep an audience engaged if you haven't yet convinced them that what you're writing about is something that they should care about. So keep that in mind as you write too. Your textbook also reminds you that the literal answer to the question, who are my readers, is likely going to be my teacher. However, remember that in college you're writing for an academic audience, which will also include your classmates. It's true your teacher is going to be the one that's offering your grade, but your teacher's reading your paper, not just thinking you're trying to reach out to her, but thinking that you're trying to reach out to an academic audience. So since your audience will also include your classmates, you should remember that your audience members are literate, intelligent, and moderately well-informed. They might not know everything about your topic, but they're literate, intelligent people who are moderately well-informed. Your audience does not know everything that you know about your topic, and it also does not know your response to the problem that you are addressing. So keep those things in mind as you write. They don't know everything you know because they haven't written the paper, and they don't know the response because it's your own response, it's your own thesis. You need to explain that to them. Here are a few of my own tips about audience. You should remember that you don't want to bore your audience or insult them by being too simplistic or doing things like offering dictionary definitions of terms that a literate, intelligent person would know. I think it's because students struggle with opening introductions or because sometimes they themselves have to go to the dictionary to look up at the meaning of a term, the exact meaning of a term, so that they know they're using it correctly when they write. But if it's a very common term, it's not necessary for you to define that for your readers. It can seem kind of insulting or can bore them and lose them a little bit. Another thing is, since you'll be writing for an academic audience, you must also keep a formal tone. Avoid slang, contractions, cliches, and write in objective third person and not first or second person. Don't use too much jargon. That means if you're writing about a specialized topic, don't use too many words that are specific to that field that your audience might not understand. And my final tip is that you should keep your audience in mind the entire time you work on a writing project. The audience is collaborator. This is on page 236 to 239. I really think some of the things that we just talked about, some of the tips that I just gave you, there are examples to help you understand those tips in pages 236 to 239. The audience is going to work with you, but that means you need to work with them. And what this section does, 236 to 239, is give you some clear tips on information you should include, times you might not want to include information, but it gives some really good, clear examples that will help you to ask yourself questions during the writing process to help you better address the needs of an academic audience. There's a checklist on page 239 for imagining audience that you can use. I would keep it in mind the entire time you're writing. Use it before you plan, use it as you're planning, use it as you're drafting, use it as you're revising. Keep it in mind when you're done. When you think you're done with your paper, it's going to help you go over it at the end too. Who are my readers? You always want to keep that in mind. How much about the topic do they know? Have I provided necessary background, including definitions of special terms, if the imagined readers probably are not especially familiar with the topic? If you're writing about human cloning, your readers might not know some of the more specialized terms that have to do with your topic. Are these imagined readers likely to be neutral? If you think that they haven't formed an opinion yet, then you have more convincing to do. If you think the audience is sympathetic, that is, they already probably agree with your view, then you need to go a little bit further. You need to give them some new insight into the problem, some new insight to your solution, offer a new solution to the problem, or encourage them to act on whatever the problem is and what your solution is. And if you're dealing with an audience that's likely to be hostile, then you have even more work to do. You need to be careful to acknowledge that there is opposition, that you understand their point, but that you also can gently sort of guide them to see, I see where you're coming from, but this isn't quite right, and then trying to explain why it's not correct. So if they are neutral, have I offered some good reasons to persuade them? If they are sympathetic, have I done more than merely reaffirm their present beliefs? That is, have I perhaps enhanced their views or encouraged them to act? If they are hostile, have I taken account of their positions, recognized their strengths, but also called to attention their limitations, that is, the limitations of their arguments and positions, and offered a position that may persuade these hostile readers to modify their position? So as you're working on your paper, you want to try to keep a title in mind. Don't neglect the title of your essay. The title is the first opportunity to engage your readers. Your textbook offers several tips on title writing. You can announce your thesis in your title, and here are some examples from your book. Gay marriages, make them legal. Diversity is a smokescreen for discrimination. Or why handguns must be outlawed. A title can be simple, but it must be your own. Don't just write writing assignment 4, writing assignment 5, or essay for English. Make sure you come up with your own title. If you're writing about another work, you don't want to just title your essay the name of the other work. The opening paragraph or paragraphs no longer piece. For now, we're writing shorter essays. You should have just one introduction, just one introductory paragraph. When we get into the research paper, you'll see you may have a few. You might need 2 paragraphs before you introduce your thesis. But for right now, we're going to work on having one opening paragraph. Your textbook gives you several tips for openings, which can be difficult to write. I myself, sometimes I wait to write my opening until I've already written my paper. Then I have a better idea of how to open my paper. I even always did this with in-class writing assignments by just leaving myself some space to go back and write it later. Here are your textbook's tips on ways to open. You can attract the reader's interest with a bold statement of the thesis or with an interesting statistic, quotation, or anecdote, that is a story that's related to your topic. You can prepare the reader's mind by giving some idea of the topic and often of the thesis. You can give the reader an idea of how the essay is going to be organized, so you can set up some of your points, how you're going to be going through to prove your main point, or you can define a key term. Again, remembering not a term that's too simple, but something a little bit more complicated. Pages 242 to 243 give you sample openings to examine. An entire sample student essay appears at the end of the chapter. There's also information on introductions in your Bedford Handbook and on OWL Purdue. Your textbook offers some specific organizational strategies on 243 to 246 that you should look over, but here I want to give you a few more general tips. Make sure you have an introductory paragraph at the beginning of your essay and make sure that it includes your thesis statement. Make sure that you have body paragraphs that appear in a logical order. Make sure that each body paragraph has a clear topic sentence and a transition if needed. Make sure that all your ideas are connected with transitions that help your reader follow your argument. And remember, when you're reading along and you're looking at your final paper, if you see a really short paragraph, the most likely explanation is that that paragraph is an undeveloped paragraph. Here are 3 general tips from your textbook on organization. Unify the essay by eliminating irrelevancies. So the word unify means it's all cohesive, it's one whole, to make something cohesive, to make it whole. A unified essay is an essay that doesn't have anything that doesn't help prove the thesis in it. Organize the essay by keeping the intended audience in mind, and clarify the essay by fleshing out thin paragraphs, those small paragraphs, by making certain that generalizations are adequately supported by concrete details and examples. If you're trying to move up on the rubric in critical thinking, this is really, really important. Organization is for clarity and organization, and so is unifying. But doing these things, making sure you have adequately supported statements, that you're not just leaving generalizations, is what's going to help you move up in critical thinking. Your textbook also reminds you, this is important, organization isn't a matter of just polishing or elegance. Polishing or elegance is language. But if you don't have a clear pattern of organization, you just don't really have a strong essay at all. Your argument and your essay completely fall apart when no one can follow the organization of it. Finally, the ending. The endings are also really difficult to write, I understand that. But it isn't necessary to repeat every point you've made in your essay in the concluding paragraph. I would say no. Even, my master's thesis was 65 pages. The conclusion itself was 5 additional pages. And I didn't repeat everything back that I'd already said. I may have reminded people of some key points, but really what I was doing was driving my main point home one final time. You're writing shorter essays at this time. It's not necessary when you get that last paragraph to repeat everything that you've already written. Remember, you're trying to keep your audience in mind, and you may insult them, or you may lose them or bore them if you just repeat back everything you've already said. You're writing for an audience of literate, intelligent people. So the answer is no, I don't need to repeat back everything I've already written. Work at bringing your essay to a natural close, so it should be obvious that you're coming to a close, and not with stock phrases like in conclusion or to summarize or to recapitulate. Make sure you're driving your point home one more time. Here are some ways you can bring a sense of closure to your essay in the concluding paragraph. You can use one of the following devices from your textbook: a return to something in the introduction, a statistic or anecdote or etc., a glance at the wider implications of the issue, for example, if smoking is restricted, other liberties are threatened, an anecdote that illustrates the thesis, or a brief summary. Very brief though, and remember, don't repeat back everything you've said in the same words you've already said it. For this class, you must have a concluding paragraph for your essay, even if the essay included in this chapter does not have one. You'll see when you read the student essay in this chapter that she sort of just wraps things up in that final paragraph. But because the expectation of the English department at Palm Beach State is that essays have separate concluding paragraphs, you're going to have a separate concluding paragraph to this essay. So this presentation is finished, but go over the rest of the chapter to read a bit about tone. As you work on your essay this week, remember all you have read in not only this chapter, but in the 5 that preceded it. You need to demonstrate the argumentative writing skills that all the chapters have discussed. This paper is a warm-up for the research paper.